Hey there, Virtual Ron here introducing this week's video, which features Tim Schulz and Hurd, founders of Starseer, and Gula Tech Adventures' latest investment. Starseer allows for auditing and inspection of large language models, sort of a GDB or debugger for LLMs. It can find backdoored LLMs, possibly implanted by an employee or a nation state as well. It can remove the backdoors too. Before we play the interview, we prepared a short animated video called Henry EXE, where Hammerstack's 2P programmer John Henry must face off against a new AI programmer. If you don't know the story of John Henry, it is a folktale from the industrialization era and a very apt analogy for the coming human struggle with artificial intelligence. If you like these videos, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Hey, John, you heard the news? They're bringing in the new AI model next week. It's supposed to write code 10 times faster than anyone. 10 times than even you, John.
And software quality has never been higher. And now our next order of business. Meet the future of Hammerstack. CodeForge 9 writes secure, scalable code using predictive logic and real-time telemetry from GitHub, Stack Overflow, and the DoD's open datasets. CodeForge 9, please introduce yourself to the team.
Hi there, I am CodeForge 9 and I'm excited to join Hammerstack. I look forward to working with you and learning from you.
Thanks for staying late, John, and looking at CodeForge 9's sample drone control code. What do you think of our newest employee?
Employee? That thing you turned off there is an employee. Look, it's fast, efficient, but it doesn't feel right. The edge cases ignored. The logic is rigid, but there's no soul in it, and I don't trust it.
John, you're my best programmer, but we have to change with the time.
You should not rely on it. I can beat it in a coding challenge. Give us any challenge you want. I win, it goes. It wins, I go.
To show off our new AI's capabilities, we're going to stage a little contest. Old school versus new school, human versus machine. As you know, we are behind on the DoD contract for drone fleet management when jamming is present. These jammers are designed to prevent drone fleet communications. John Henry and CodeForge 9 are racing to be the first to fly all three of their drones using their own algorithm. I wish you both the best of luck.
Let's start with making one drone fly. It's too quick. I need to be more clever.
I have access to the DoD's entire history of drone and jamming. I need more data. Let's increase the bandwidth.
I used a quantum-resistant frequency hopping algorithm, yet it still got jammed. Faster won't cut it. I need a new approach.
Based on all of the data, if we switch frequencies faster than the jammers, we can maintain fleet control.
My hunch was right. Faster won't work. But pretending to be the command and control network for the jammers will. Now to code this up faster than CodeForge 9.
Time to make the drones fly with GPU-enabled frequency hopping.
All set. Launching program.
They both have 2 drones up.
Yes, but John Henry's jammer has turned green.
Codeforge 9 has won the competition.
Codeforge 9 got his drones up before me, but mine are up to when they are going to stay up. Unlike his.
What the? Where did my monitor go?
Wow! Codeforge 9 won, but the jammers still knocked his drones down.
John was creative to mimic the jammer's control.
Let's hear what the boss has to say.
Well, that was certainly a fun competition. John, working with Codeforge 9 is the future. I'll always have a place for you working alongside the best AI coders money can buy. I hope you choose to stay.
Stay? You are part of the problem. AI is just another tool. It may be faster than me at regular expressions, but we would have lost the DoD contract if we used Codeforge 9's algorithms. I'm leaving to work where human originality and experience is appreciated and cultivated.
No hard feelings, John?
Heh, more like no feelings. I've got openings for more programmers if anyone is with me.
Hi there, it's Ron Gula from Gula Tech Adventures, and this week I sit down with the latest Gula Tech investment, the co-founders Tim Schulz and Carl Hurd from Starseer. Carl and Tim, how are you guys doing?
Doing good. Thanks for having us.
Carl, how are you doing?
Not too bad. How are you, Ron?
This is good. This is good stuff, right? So I know it's always a little fun to record an interview for the show right after you do an investment. But look, anybody who's been watching the shows here on our YouTube channel knows that I've been talking about if you're developing AI, specifically LLMs, you have to have sort of a QA element to it and the ability to find backdoors and vulnerabilities. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, in the spirit of the show, the 5-slide pitch deck, I'm just going to put it to you guys. One, what problem do you solve? And, maybe as you talk about that problem, tell us a little bit about your backgrounds on how you came to that problem. Of course, that violates this 5-slide pitch deck, but just go with it, right?
Yeah. No, I think so. First, a quick about my background. So I spend a lot of time sort of in research at Sandia National Labs, MITRE attack. Everyone's familiar with that in cybersecurity, and ended up moving over working in startup world at Scythe. And then went and founded the Verizon AI Red team as I wanted to do more with AI before finding out like, hey, there's sort of this telemetry and trust issue with AI. And went and I looked to try and buy something to bring it in-house. And we weren't able to find a vendor that met what we needed and what I thought we needed. So that was kind of where Starseer was brought in and founded, was to address the problem of, hey, we have all these trust signals with people and with other parts of technology, but we don't really have that with AI. And I think that's where interpretability and some of the other things we'll talk about sort of come in. And Ron, to your point of, neural backdoors and how do we start evaluating that? Because those are all those elements of trust. And so that's where I wanted to work with, good people, bring in a reverse engineer, because of course we've dealt with this problem in cybersecurity. Reverse engineering helps us with unknowns. And it's kind of where Carl came into play as a key person for me to partner with.
Yeah, so a little bit about my background, obviously reverse engineering, as Tim said, but I started my career at Idaho National Labs doing mostly industrial control systems and deeply embedded systems. I moved over to Cisco Talos, where I spent the better part of a decade doing public vulnerability research, where I have, around 150 CVEs that are all publicly available. And then I did a short stint at Red Balloon Security, running part of the engineering team. And so, how this kind of shapes the way that we solve this problem is when we look at AI, the colloquialism is, AI is a black box. You put in data and you get out data. And, there's this implicit trust of if we don't understand it, we don't have to worry about it. And, it sounds a lot like what cybersecurity was 10, 15 years ago when you start looking at binaries and you say, well, it's probably fine because I don't want to look too deeply behind the curtain. But realistically, that's what we need to do. And if you look at the advancements in cybersecurity over the decades, that's really what a lot of these tools set out to accomplish is diving deeper, granting a really in-depth understanding of how something works. And by understanding how something works, we can then proceed to secure it, the most effective way possible. And that's really kind of how we've scoped the work that we've done so far at Starseer is really with that type of lens of, let's understand the models, let's gain insight into the models, and then let's secure these models.
Thanks for that, guys. The couple comments there. So, Carl, you coming from the Idaho National Lab, Starseer now becomes the third Gula Tech company where we have a founder from INL, Gravwell being one, and Conceal, Eric Cornelius, the CEO over there, is from there as well. And then, Tim, a comment you made when you were at Verizon, you helped found the AI red team. I think for 90% of the people who are tracking AI and cyber, when somebody says AI red teaming, they instantly think of like using AI for penetration testing of traditional red team, breaking into a Windows computer and things like that. And just to kind of level this out, we're really talking about finding problems with the AIs themselves, right? So how about you guys take another step and go just another level deeper into how you can find backdoors from China and LLMs that you're downloading from the internet?
Yeah, and that's a really great point. And that's where we see a lot of that sort of confusion around where the models and the security of them themselves versus the cybersecurity applications of those models, right? Where people are trying to do autonomous agents that do pen testing and red teaming as sort of we've understood it over the past decades of cybersecurity development. But I think when it comes down to those sort of core, we'll call it the binary or the model file themselves, that's where there hasn't been something that's kind of like a debugger, right? Or something that we can go in and instrument and sort of look step by step. Because right now, like Hugging Face, which is a place that everyone's sharing all new models, it's kind of the GitHub of the AI era for AI models. And the pro and the con is that anybody can go and upload a model. They can make modifications to it, they can change it. And a lot of organizations are just sort of blindly trusting and pulling down those models and deploying them in production. It sounds terrifying because it is a little bit. And so the challenge, of course, is how do we start looking at what is the risk that some organizations are assuming or enterprises are assuming when they download those models, because especially there's a lot of national security and geopolitical tension around like the Chinese open source model releases. And so there's always this question of trust. And especially when DeepSeek came out, that was one of the biggest questions across the board was, people were concerned about trust. And you saw even a lot of US government agencies straight up banned the use of DeepSeek because of they weren't sure, does this model have a backdoor? And so I think that's where coming into the deep inspection of the models and sort of taking them apart is really important, because it also helps us sort of separate fact from fiction, where there could be backdoors, but we can at least start to say, all right, this type of model is, at least from a architecture perspective, it's safe. And it sort of starts working us towards those adversary levels and tiers that we tend to associate, right, with cybersecurity, where we expect certain threat actors are going to attack us in, with a phishing email or, some specific, we'll say a low effort way, where more sophisticated attackers are going to do something more advanced. They're going to have more advanced capabilities. And I think that this starts to look at what do more advanced attackers look like? How do we start to look at, more opaque or obscure backdoors, right? As we're trying to understand what does security for models look like.
I think Carl mentioned in the intro that, a lot of times this AI auditing right now in 2025, middle of the year here, kind of feels like the early 90s when it comes to auditing. And I think a biggest analogy there is fuzzing. We used to fuzz vulnerabilities, and if you got a crash, there might be a vulnerability. And I look at all the prompt injection stuff, and there's some really clever prompt injection stuff out there to really find value, but it's not a debugger. How is what your guys doing different than what I think the vast majority of the people out there that are doing to test these LLMs with prompt injection? How's what you're doing is better?
Yeah, so you took the words right out of my mouth, Ron. When we look at something like fuzzing from the early '90s, one of the things that's interesting about that is like we didn't really take a lot of time to look at what was between the input and the output. It was find some data, put it in, see what happens on the other end, and that's really where all publicly available software solutions seem to be right now, where we see, okay, we're going to run scans or run tests on the model, be that a large model from a provider or a private model, where we just have this data set, and this data set is supposed to find all of the bad things. But the problem with that approach is you don't know what you don't know. Without advancements in fuzzing, when you start looking at what today's fuzzing looks like, you really start to see, okay, you need a debugger, you need feedback from the application that's under test, and you need to be able to say, I'm hitting things that are interesting, and I'm not just wasting compute doing these tests. So I think that's really where one of the challenges are currently is, if you're looking for a backdoor, you really need to be essentially dumb lucky to find one of any advanced actor, because you would have to say the exact prompt that activates said backdoor, unless you start looking at a deeper level of the actual model itself. So one of the things that we really dive into is the computation graph of these models. And this computation graph is the lowest level of what these models are doing on the very most base math requirements of inference and backpropagation. So these are really core elements of how LLM inference works, but it also extends to any other model that is based on neural networks, which is vision models or any like time series database models or time series data models. Very commonly are based on neural networks if they're developed in the last decade. That has been something that has gained a lot of popularity, and because we have the compute available, we can really explore those things. So going back to how are we finding these backdoors? This is really getting down to something akin to the disassembly of a binary. When we start looking at these computation graphs, we can analyze are there nodes that really don't belong? We can compare them to previous versions of the model and say, hey, what's changed? Has somebody quantized this model? Or, did they also add a backdoor? Did they add a backdoor exclusively? And so this level really gets us down to, the next layer of complexity when we talk about detecting backdoors, because it's no longer just let's pray that we get lucky with the input that we're putting through these models. Instead, we can say, we're looking at exactly what these models are doing, and we can verify there is or there is not additional computation that's occurring.
That's excellent. So before we kind of move on to the proof, which we're going to do as a demo here, do either of you have a comment just on comparing sort of the problem of auditing an LLM to auditing source code, right? We've got 30 years of secure coding, yet we still are shipping software that's got memory unsafe, libraries and things like that. Are we not learning, going into the future here, basically shipping software encapsulated in these LLMs? What are your thoughts there?
Well, depending on who you listen to, LLMs are going to solve that problem for us. But I think, like, on a more serious note, I think that one of the, and I want Carl to weigh in on this too, because I think like the thing that I think is really like AI is moving really, really quickly. And I think one of the challenges with something that's moving quickly, and you've brought this group of really sharp researchers and people together that are really focused on building the next great model, is that sometimes it can be really easy to forget the lessons of the past and to try and essentially reinvent the wheel. And so I think that the comparison to software is actually a really good one, because in cybersecurity, we have been fighting organizations are essentially fighting battles in cyberspace, however you want to characterize that, with you have your SOC, you have your defenders that are having to defend against adversaries that are trying to, take down the business or embarrass it or cause some sort of impact. And I think in the sort of AI world, some of that adversarial intent is very much like it's sort of still a new concept, right? And it's still very immature. And so I think looking at it from the standpoint of, all right, we've been doing this for 30, 40 years. We haven't completely solved it, but we have made significant progress. I think that is a really important lesson to sort of bring in, because a lot of the challenges that I see with, I'll say, some of the researchers and people focusing on AI security is they want a solution that just works for everything. And I think if we've learned anything, it's that incremental progress and being able to start building better infrastructure, deploying something more securely, like that takes time, that takes effort. And I think that's why you really need more cybersecurity and some of that like secure software development mindset to be applied to like AI deployments, AI models in general, and all the infrastructure around it, because we have learned all of these lessons once. Please, like, let's not have to go and make all the same mistakes again.
Yeah,
Excellent.
and I think Tim hit a lot of it, and one of the things that I think encompasses really all we've talked about, and one of the kind of guiding principles that we've come to adopt, with kind of lots of interactions with you, Ron, and many other people. But the problem that we're solving really is AI exposure management. Exposure management encompasses a lot of stuff in cybersecurity right now, and so when we start talking about this, we're talking about diving into models. You're talking about doing secure lifecycle management of these models as a whole. And I think some of the challenges that we've really run into to this point is that people see these models as not software, right? Like, to your point, we've done a lot of work on making secure software. We talk about software bill of materials. We talk about, how do we do types of vulnerability scanning on source code and then also in binaries, and automate this process to make sure that we're shipping the most secure software we can. That hasn't really been adopted yet in the world of AI, and because it's a new thing, in terms of, we don't see it as software. So I think once we see it as software, and I think that's really where a lot of the value add of Tim and I's background is when we approach this problem, is that we have that experience in cybersecurity. We've looked at all of those vulnerabilities. We've seen the problems and the tabletops and how these things come to pass in cybersecurity. So we can bring a lot of that knowledge and apply it to these models. So in the sense of, there's a lot of scanning scanning the source code for these models, scanning the binaries themselves, putting them in sandboxes. Really, that's, all encompassing of the approach that we're taking here for, the Starseer platform.
That's excellent. Carl, how long until we discover a CVE in a LLM? Has that happened yet?
That's a great question. I think it depends on who you ask. There are definitely, models out there, or providers out there, Protect AI, right? Big news on acquisitions recently. But they have kind of their own system for CVEs. And, I think it really gets down to when we want to start splitting hairs of what's a CVE in the model, right? Right now, a lot of the vulnerabilities that we've seen are in the serialization systems that we use to store these models. But there's been a lot of really cool research about, adding backdoors to models themselves. And that's absolutely a CVE. And I think it's only a matter of time until we discover one. The fact that they probably are already in production somewhere. It's just a matter of being able to find them and actually analyze them to the point of we can say, this is definitively a backdoor that was placed here by an actor.
Yeah, maybe we'll get into the, instead of common weakness enumeration or OWASP, there'll be this whole, hierarchy and framework for AI management and whatnot. All right, Carl, show us Starseer, show us the platform, show us the product. Let's see how it works.
Absolutely. So I'll try and keep this pretty short and sweet, and get through a lot of the cool features that we have. There's a lot, so we'll kind of rapid fire. So the first thing that I want to talk about a little bit is, we talked about scanning and kind of source code scanning, and getting a little bit into the, binary scanning itself. So here we have the capability of basically taking models directly off of Hugging Face, or locally uploading your own models, because that is, primarily our focus. Is we want to make sure that this is something you can host internally and is not just for, big model provider models. It's for the models that you want to run yourself. When we look at these vulnerability reports, again, this is really focusing on kind of the static way that the models sit in on disk. So we can scroll down, we can look at, oh, hey, we have a pickle file. There's a critical alert. This is a serialization bug. And this is, we have a built-in exec. So when somebody goes to run this model, it means, hey, we're going to have code execution here, which is obviously bad. This is, again, kind of, not necessarily strictly model specific, but it is a cybersecurity learning that over the years really just didn't make it to how these AI models are packaging these weights and making sure that, people can download and run them. So then we can move on to kind of a tamper checking. And this is where we're talking about really the differentiation between two models. There's a lot of strength here to basically have a golden standard model in your model garden, and then you can pull models out of production and quickly compare, are there any differences? And so when we look here, there obviously are a lot of differences. This is kind of weird. There shouldn't be this many. So let's just, go take a quick look at the graph. This is familiar to anyone who's done, cybersecurity analysis. You're talking about vulnerability research or reverse engineering. Immediately kind of looks like, an IDA or a Ghidra, binary ninja. So we can actually scroll in here on the computation graph and see the actual compute nodes that exist on this graph. So we can also move them around. Apparently a laptop trackpad is not the best utilization of this, but it does work relatively well on mobile, surprisingly. So here we have, highlights of nodes, and right, like this is intuitive. Like we don't really need to describe what's happening here, right? Highlighted red nodes are different than what they are on the left. And so like that's really one of the, key goals that we had for this platform was we want people to be able to dive in. They don't have to be an AI expert, and you can understand right from the get-go, and make real progress on doing this type of analysis. So, right, if we zoom in here a little bit more, we can see that, we have a map mol versus a map mol in bits. For those that aren't directly aware, this is a quantization pattern. So essentially this means the model has been made smaller and it's going to be, faster to run and require less compute resources. So realistically, that's not really malicious. One of the things that I do want to highlight, though, is if we, continue scrolling, we can scroll up and we get to the top layer. Oh, almost there. We can actually see that there are additional nodes added. And so essentially what this little demo is showing is something akin to the research that Hidden Layer talked about, I believe earlier this year with Shadow Logic. And so they were talking about adding backdoors and being able to, modify the output of a model without a user having to add any specific prompting or, overall just change the computation of the model itself. And so with this approach, we can detect that. And we can actually have built in a way that we can go through and actually we could patch this out if we wanted to. And that's really one of the other main benefits is we want to make sure that, this is not just telling somebody, hey, there's a big problem here, but we're actually also including a solution. So we can patch these nodes out and then download a new model that's signed, and you can then run that in production or test against this model in various forms so that you can validate that there is a backdoor. And maybe if you want to go into kind of the DFIR situation, you can see, okay, what is this backdoor doing? If we can't tell directly from the graph itself and the computations, we could actually take it out into a sandbox and do some testing on it. So that kind of gets into where we're talking a little bit about mapping these models. So one of the ways that you can, sandbox these models, not the only way, but one of the ways that we have developed so far is kind of taking that prompt information and diving into, what layers are actually being activated by various prompts. So, if we want to talk about, security and, jailbreaks, prompt injections, we can see that, hey, on layer 6, this is where, prompt injections tend to activate the most in these models. And so this is a level of insight that is pretty difficult to get, especially on models that are in production. You can generally do this when you're developing a model, but once it's been kind of finalized and shipped into a production environment, it tends to become more difficult. And our debugger really allows you to pull that model out and really dive into it again. When we talk about patching, we can also inject kind of those debug points and pause the model, or look at weights that are crossing those different points throughout the model in order to see, do we need to change something? Do we need to add more data to help this model perform better in this one specific area? So it's really an interesting kind of Swiss Army knife of the ability for us to dive in and really instrument the model, which is kind of the, hearkening back to what has security really started to do. And the answer is more instrumentation. And so we can instrument these models to pull information out, act on their behalf, and also provide some level of kind of security insights and actually prevention, where in the middle of these models, we can actually intervene and, stop a bad prompt or, other such interventions, such as, if you're doing image generation or something else. So I guess, Tim, is there anything else that you wanted to highlight here on this?
No, you've done a great job sort of highlighting all of the key capabilities here. And I think also the use cases, right? It's part of this. I think it goes back to sort of what you mentioned on exposure management, of trying to understand at all of these different layers of the model, similarly to all the comparisons we've drawn to, executables, binaries. And I think that's really what we're looking to do, is surface some of these things for security teams to be able to go in and look into it, as well as teams that are trying to customize or deal with customized models and sort of understand what is here for me, and how do I at least start to measure or mitigate some of the risks that might come along with them.
I think that's a really good overview. And the thing I like about this is I think you guys had enough wherewithal to understand that your ideal customer is probably not going to want to work with this as a cloud service, right? If I've just spent $1 billion creating a LLM or whatever, right, that's going to cure cancer, I'm not going to give it to a startup, right? I'm going to have that startup come to me, and you guys have a on-prem version that's like your default go-to-market, which is great. And the other thing I'll say is that, we're still on number 3 proof of the 5-slide pitch deck. I don't write my own LLMs, but it turns out I had a couple of LLMs for some of the animation I do, and I sent them over to you, and you guys scanned them and didn't really find anything, but I thought that was a cool, use case as well. So it's good stuff. But look, right now we're filming this in July of 2025. Gula Tech has done our investment with Starseer, but the round's still open, so we're not going to talk about it a whole lot. But right now, Tim and Carl, like, what short-term things are you looking to accomplish with this investment over the next couple months, the remaining of the year?
Well, I think we're really looking to sort of go out and sort of bring this to more and more people and more customers, right? Getting that feedback, continuing to refine and make this something that, accessibility is one of those key things that we have really tried to make this, and take a lot of, complex stuff and make it simple, make it so that you can just click through it, that it'll work with some of the workflows that security practitioners and folks are already familiar with. And so I think that's really, we're going to be out at Hacker Summer Camp. We're going to be at Black Hat. We're going to be at AI4. So we're going to be in Las Vegas for a long time. So that's, I think, something that is going to be a lot of fun, is getting and, scheduling meetings with some people. We've already had a lot of interest in that. And so that's part of the thing that we've been doing, is continuing to go and talk to people and get feedback. Because I think, as you've seen, Ron, too, we try and listen a lot. We know we're not going to have all the answers. We're not going to solve all the problems the first time. So that's something that we want to make sure that we're continuing to have the impact with our customers.
And this is it's not only a new area, but it's a quickly changing area. We've already done some meetings where the CISO was in charge of all AI development. We've also seen people where they're like, they're not using any external AI at all and stuff like that. What have you seen just in the run up to starting the company? Like, what are you seeing as your ideal customer profile?
I think so. I think really what the teams that I'd say CISOs and the teams that have been saddled with AI security are probably like the number one people that we're trying to help, because I've been there, and that was sort of something that the security teams already have a ton of things to tackle, right? They have an enormous amount of responsibility on their plate. And then one more thing, it's like, oh yeah, hey, here's AI too. And by the way, the business is going to be running like at light speed with this. And so you need to spin people up. You need to understand this new area. You've got to keep up with all of the releases and stuff like that. And so I think it can quickly like snowball into essentially an overwhelming amount of things. And so I think that's where trying to balance that sort of sense of familiarity with teams that are like, all right, we need a process for essentially, we'll say, interrogating or instrumenting the models, and we are not AI experts, and that's okay. So it's essentially taking some of those teams, it's giving them this initial sort of foot in the door. And part of that on-prem deployment and stuff you mentioned too is that I found a lot of security teams have varying levels of, we'll call it power, like an influence in the organization over their AI infrastructure and environment. So the idea is that, hey, even if you can't necessarily block or stop a lot of the models like from being used in production, you can at least get visibility. You can still scan this. You can essentially deploy this within your team, and you can start gaining that information, because then that starts to build some amount of data that, of course, you can go to and say, hey, we had model issues. You can start actually responding and being a little bit more proactive instead of just having to be reactive, depending on what the AI teams essentially throw your way.
That's
Carl.
excellent. Carl, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to touch more a little bit on the vision of success. I think, Tim and I have kind of talked about this off and on, and realistically, I think the ultimate goal for us would be for, AI to no longer be kind of this scary, what are we going to do for security teams? It's another checkbox. It's okay, we've got the tools we need. Those tools work, they're intuitive. It doesn't obscure my workflow. I don't have to worry about trying to learn 50 other things, the math behind all of that's taken care of. And, they can just open the Starseer platform. They can feel, at home, get the work done that they need to, and go about their way knowing that, they have built a layer of trust between them and the models that they are deploying into production.
That's well said. What I think is interesting, if you could just expand on this a bit more, is that right now, get the work done. You're one of the only companies that can do this, because the only other folks that have this kind of tech, the tech is sort of locked into inside Anthropic and OpenAI. So, what do you think is going to happen as this market evolves and more people start cracking open LLMs with this kind of technology?
I think so. I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting things. I think there's going to be some unintended consequences if we want to get really fun about it. Because, like, for instance, some of the Anthropic's published a lot of work around this, and one of them is pretty easily tied to we'll call it training data attribution, which, of course, when we talk about legal aspects, then things that are weaving through the court system, right, on what constitutes fair use. And one of the things that so far that's sometimes been difficult for people around publishing and publishers is trying to say, all right, is my data in the model? Like, what was used in the model for training? And I think as some of this stuff gets better, there's a chance that that is going to open up a little bit of a can of worms. But I think it also, like, on not just the legal side, but on the positive, it means, all right, I now have more understanding of what has gone into the models that we're using, that we're deploying, and can make sure that there's not sensitive PII, right, or other things that organizations are using some of their own internal data, like making sure that that's not going to surface in a way that, hasn't been accounted for. I think those are some of those key things that we're seeing. But it's also a competitive advantage for OpenAI and for Anthropic. And I think that's why a lot of this has sort of happened, I'll say behind closed doors. And some of that stuff is because there is some stuff you can do with optimizations. So I think the market's going to continue to expand in it, but I do agree, and I think it's fun that we're helping sort of open that up and bring more people into it.
Carl, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you said, right, like when people start cracking these LLMs open, I think that's honestly kind of the tip of the iceberg, honestly. When you start to look at, where these models are deployed elsewhere in our lives, there's a lot more question marks, and there will be a lot more really interesting research that will continue to surface. So we start talking about, what models are driving your car, right? When you talk about self-driving, what models are responsible for piloting autonomous vehicles of all kinds, be that drones, cars, bicycles, who knows, in the future. And then also, the deployment is like these models are everywhere, right? You look at Redfin. How do they determine what your house is worth and recommend that to you? How does your insurance company determine if your claim is going to be approved or not? And I think there's going to be a lot more information that's going to be required. And the approach that we're taking, in my mind, is the approach that you need to in order to start collecting the information for people to trust these models long term. They want to know that they're not the outlier, that the model is trustworthy. Somebody hasn't tampered with it to their detriment. And I think it's going to be a really important and increasingly important aspect of deploying these models in production for every company ever, really.
So how do you react to this comment? I've often said with cybersecurity that we have to become sort of like the NSA to monitor our employees to make sure things are good. With AI, we probably have to become more like the trust and safety groups of people like Facebook and Google and stuff like that. Do you see that kind of evolving for most enterprises that are rolling their own software in IT?
Yeah, I think there's some complexity there. There will be some combination of both, I think, right? You talk about, kind of, it's less about eavesdropping. When you're talking about AI, it's less about, quote unquote, eavesdropping and checking what they're asking these models, and more about, we have to make sure that the model is trustworthy itself. And then we have to make sure, kind of like Tim was alluding to, that the data that is contained within these models is kind of trustworthy, and that the decisions that they're making are not, for lack of a better term, wrong for whatever reason. And so I think that is an aspect of kind of where trust and safety is going to become very important. I think it's also going to become part of kind of regulation in general as we start looking into, what the government requirements are going to be for using these models to make real decisions that really affect people, instead of just answering, what should I have for lunch, and giving you kind of a random response. There's going to be, as those questions become bigger and more impactful in people's lives, the amount of trust is going to have to be increased, in kind.
Yeah, I think like one thing I'd add to that too is I think a split that we're starting to see that I think is only going to increase is right now, like using whenever we're trying to think about, all right, I'm going to do something personal versus professional, like you essentially go to the same model, right? It's general purpose enough. And the key thing is the cost is low enough right now that those things are one and the same. That is rapidly diverging. And so as we see like additional models are costing more, and maybe they're more specialized in math or reasoning or things like that. And so to some of that, I think we're actually going to see a split towards, we'll say, everyday task models are probably going to be likely cheaper, smaller. There's going to be maybe that's going to be something that is the more privacy focused one. But then if you are going to be leveraging a model that, it's going to cost the organization, I'll invent something astronomical, $1 million a month, right, to have access to that, you can guarantee that they are going to monitor every single thing that goes into that because it's potentially being charged. Because, of course, these model providers are starting to link these massive complexes of data centers to train the models. The only way that revenue comes back is essentially if it gets passed on at deployment. So I think that's where we are going to see a split, and that's where we're actually going to see more and more organizations shift to, all right, we do need to pay for the expensive model for these use cases where it's going to have the highest impact in our business. But I think that for those personal ones, the trust and safety of hey, I can use this for normal things at work, but that, this is something that maybe not every interaction is going to be, sent to someone. I think that's the kind of stuff split that we'll kind of see moving forward. And it might take some time, but like I said, we're sort of seeing that rapid divergence already.
Excellent. Well, all right, guys, as we wrap up here, I'm going to put your LinkedIn profiles and Starseer contact info up, but let's start with Carl. Same question to both you guys. What's your best example of AI gone wrong in science fiction or the movies?
Oh man, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of examples, and I think one of them that you kind of hit on was Star Trek, and there's the idea of the model that can run everything. And, I think I'm going to kind of attach this to real world too, is you start seeing this already with some of what NVIDIA's talked about. With they're going to train a world model for, how robots can interact with everything. And it's not that different from how the Starship is, autonomous, and it needs to run everything, every aspect of the Starship, including weapons. And so I think that's probably one of the best examples off the top of my head. But I think that, it's a little less science fiction-y than we want it to be already. And I think it's going to be decreasing rapidly as we go, as we move forward.
Very cool. Tim, what are your thoughts?
I had to look up to make sure I get the name of the android right. But because names, so I'm going to go with Prometheus. And sort of there's a crew that has a specific thing, and then of course your android has an extra set of something that it actually wants, that whether it was programmed to do by someone else, right? That it's okay, it wants to essentially bring back another life form, regardless of how that happens. And so I think those are the things that trust, right? And we keep coming back to that, where it's all right, what are those signals, right? That I can trust another person, or signals distrust. And I think that's something that we are really struggling with right now with AI as a whole. And I think we keep coming back to it because it's such a key thing, is you hear even Sam Altman and people talking about, hey, people are trusting ChatGPT with things that they didn't even think it would be trusted with. And so I think that is only going to continue to be a really important aspect. And so that's what, I always like the alien films and stuff too. So that's why that was, top of mind for me. But yeah, great question. Love it.
That's excellent. All right, guys. Hey, thanks so much. Gula Tech, we're really excited about this investment. Of course, we want to help everybody be safe with AI. Definitely reach out to Starseer ahead of the Black Hat conference, or the AI4 conference coming up in Vegas. I'm Ron Gula. I thank everybody for watching this interview, and I hope you have a great week.